It's Tuesday, December 2nd, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Terms. I hope everybody had a nice Thanksgiving holiday weekend. I, as you might have noticed, took a couple days off to enjoy the holiday with friends and talk to family. But we've got a doozy of a show today. It's asking the question, did Pete Hegseth and maybe the president commit a war crime? You see, news broke last week that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth gave an order to fire a second missile to kill two alleged drug traffickers who had survived a first missile strike in the Caribbean Sea, something that, according to legal experts, military experts, and U.S. law, would be straight-up murder, if not a war crime. Now, the White House has been trying to spin its way out of this one, which I'll explain, but it's having trouble getting its story straight, all at a time when it looks like the U.S. is trying to get into a war with Venezuela over what the White House says is drugs, but again, it can't seem to keep that story straight either. But first, make sure you're following or subscribe to the show wherever you listen or watch it. Follow the show on social media at MIMS Newspod. That's MIMS Newspod, all one word on every platform. You can find me at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. And be sure to subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack, because for the next 2 weeks, Make It Make Sense is running a subscription drive, and it's the perfect time to jump in. Paid subscriptions start at just $5 a month. That's it, the price of a cup of coffee, to support independent journalism that actually explains the world. Annual subscriptions are 20% off right now, and if you subscribe as a founding member, that price is locked in for good. As a paid subscriber, you get access to weekly original reporting, the Make It Make Sense community chat, and the brand new newsletter that just dropped this week, Things You Forgot from Civics class, a fast, clear breakdown of the civics stuff we should have learned but didn't. Hit the link in the show notes, support the work, and let's keep making it make sense. All right, let's get on with the show. Give the gift of luxury this holiday season with Cozy Earth. Picture it, a quiet holiday morning, everyone together wrapped in warmth, laughter, and that perfect kind of cozy that you just wish you could bottle all the time. Well, a silent night starts with the right sheets, and Cozy Earth's bamboo sheets are the ultimate gift. It's everyday luxury elevated, the kind of comfort that turns every night into a serene escape no matter how much clatter arises. Plus, every sheet has a 100-day sleep trial and a 10-year warranty. You really cannot go wrong. And don't forget about the pajamas for those holiday mornings. The women's stretch knit and the men's bamboo sets are made for those slow, snuggly holiday moments at home. Visit CozyEarth.com and use my exclusive 40% off code MIMS25, that's MIMS25, to get 40% off your entire order this holiday season. And if you get a post-purchase survey, make sure you heard about Cozy Earth from Make It Make Sense. We get a cut of that money, so you're helping us, and you get to stay warm this holiday season. Wrap the ones you love in luxury with Cozy Earth. All right, let's get back to the show. For the past few months, the U.S. has been carrying out missile strikes on boats in the Caribbean. The administration has said they thought they were drug boats carrying fentanyl into the U.S. from Venezuela. We'll talk about that a little more in just a second, because over the weekend, the Washington Post broke the story that in early September, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth gave an order to kill two people on one of those boats with a second strike after those people had survived. The direct quote from Hegseth was, according to the Post's two sources, "kill them all." Now, that report was later backed up by another one from CNN, which brings the total to 7 sources who physically heard Hegseth give the order. Now, I will say the reason that you haven't heard a lot about that strike or these strikes on Make It Make Sense so far is partly because they were happening as we were heading toward or in a government shutdown, and partly because this show is more focused on what's happening inside the U.S. than in foreign policy, but this is big enough now where I thought you should know about it and hear about it from me. So, the reporting around these strikes has led to a firestorm in the administration because Hegseth giving that order would be a war crime, or at the very least, murder. And the case for this being a war crime is growing pretty much by the hour. Firing on people like this is called a follow-on strike, sometimes called a double tap. It's explicitly banned under the rules of engagement and the laws of war. And I know there are going to be people out there who say, hey, this is war, there aren't laws. But there are. The Department of Defense has a law of war manual that explicitly says it is a requirement that orders that are illegal must not be followed no matter who gives them. And the example in the manual says orders to fire on the shipwrecked would be illegal. That was the explicit example they used because of how clear, cut, and dry it is. The U.S. also has to abide by treaties it's signed, which, according to the Department of Defense, General Counsel Office, the Department of Justice, and the State Department, the Geneva Convention is still what's called a treaty of force that the U.S. is a part of. And all that means is that we still abide by the rules and agreements in those treaties. And as a quick refresher, the Geneva Convention is the bundle of treaties that were signed after World War II to make sure the atrocities of the Holocaust and the treatment of prisoners of war in certain prison camps, largely in the Pacific, never happened again during wars. Among those treaties that we signed was one that improved protections for those shipwrecked at sea. The U.S. agreed to those protections in 1956. I don't know why it took us 7 years to sign this thing, but it's been law for 70 years. On top of that, the U.S. isn't actively at war because only Congress can declare war. Now, back in October, Trump told Congress he, quote, determined the U.S. was at war with drug cartels, and then later decided that the head of one of those cartels was the authoritarian president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. But just because the president says we're at war doesn't make it so. And there are more complicating things here as well, like an authorized use of military force, or AUMF, which lets the president carry out military strikes, but also having to inform Congress before they happen. And at the beginning of these strikes on boats in the Caribbean, Congress wasn't being notified, including at the time when the strike where Hegseth allegedly ordered a double tap happened. And then, on top of all that, the clear guidelines in U.S. and international law, the fact the president can't just declare a war, the White House rationale for targeting these boats is flimsy too. At the outset, Trump said these boats were being targeted because they were specifically carrying fentanyl, the very deadly opioid that's responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths in the U.S. Now, back in October, Trump said these boats were, quote, stacked up with bags of white powder that's mostly fentanyl and other drugs too. Except trafficking experts and even the Drug Enforcement Agency says that's not true. According to the DEA's own numbers, fentanyl seizures, meaning where the drugs are coming in, are the highest in Texas, Arizona, and California. Again, according to U.S. law enforcement, suggesting that the fentanyl is being brought in either through Mexico or from trafficking routes in the Pacific Ocean. We also know that most fentanyl is manufactured in China, not Venezuela. And then when it comes into the U.S., the American Immigration Council found, based on Border Patrol numbers, 99% of the time, fentanyl is being carried in by U.S. citizens, not cartel members on boats. Now, you could say, well, the strikes were targeting other drugs too, like cocaine, except, again, according to the DEA, only a quarter of all the cocaine being smuggled into the U.S. comes from the Atlantic side of South and Central America, and just 8% is trafficked through where these strikes have been happening. So if you're targeting drug trafficking, where we're targeting isn't exactly the best place to do it. And then on top of all that, the violations of U.S. international law, undermining Congress's war powers, not targeting the right traffickers, we get to the last part of this. Who were the people on the boats? And the answer is, we don't know. The Departments of Defense and Justice have not been able to verify that the people on the boat where Hegseth allegedly ordered the second strike, nor any of the boats they've attacked so far, have actually been drug traffickers. The initial guidance from the DOJ was to just sink the boats, but that would deny the people on those boats due process because even accused or known drug dealers and traffickers, or as you hear the White House call them, narco-terrorists, have rights. Even if they're not U.S. citizens, they still have those rights to due process, which means they have to be arrested and brought to court. And at least 2 of the people the U.S. was able to take into custody after one of these strikes have been sent back to their home countries for not being drug traffickers. So from the jump, the Department of Defense and the administration were walking a very thin line about just how legal any of this was. And then we get this reporting about Hegseth's follow-on order, and that's led to bipartisan calls in the Senate and the House for investigations into this specific strike, and it's led a large group of former military lawyers to say, after looking at the facts of the reporting, since orders to kill survivors of any attack at sea are patently illegal, anyone who issues or follows such orders can and should be prosecuted for war crimes, murder, or both. That's a direct quote. These are career military attorneys who both defended and prosecuted members of the military, investigated military misconduct, and know these laws inside and out. And they are not people who say things like this lightly. So, after the news broke, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth initially said our current operations in the Caribbean are lawful under both U.S. and international law, with all actions in compliance with the law of armed conflict and approved by the best military and civilian lawyers up and down the chain of command. He said that on Twitter. But as calls for investigations grew, he changed his story and started blaming the former admiral of the Southern U.S. Command who oversaw the strikes in the Caribbean, a guy named Frank M. Bradley. Now, Bradley, along with several other high-ranking members of the military, resigned back in October and then in November without warning and without really explaining why. But the revelation of these strikes would certainly put those resignations into some new context. It also puts into context why those Democratic members of Congress and the Senate put out a video reminding members of the military that they're required not to follow illegal orders just 2 weeks ago, too, something that I've been wondering and asking about publicly about why they would do that then. Anyway, Hegseth told the president, according to Trump, as of Sunday, that he didn't give the order to send the second missile, and Trump said he 100% believed him, meaning the president was now putting the blame on Admiral Bradley, too. Well, that has really angered many members of the military who already have not been big fans of Hegseth. One military official telling the Washington Post that throwing Bradley under the bus like this was, quote, some Protect Pete bullshit. Then, on Monday, the White House and Hegseth changed their story again. Hegseth saying Admiral Mitch Bradley is an American hero, a true professional, and has my 100% support. I stand by him and the combat decisions he made on the September 2nd mission and all others since. And the White House Press Secretary, Caroline Leavitt, said this.
To be clear, does the administration deny that that second strike happened, or did it happen and the administration denies that Secretary Hegseth gave the order?
The latter is true, Abe, and I have a statement to read for you here. President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have made it clear that presidentially designated narco-terrorist groups are subject to lethal targeting in accordance with the laws of war. With respect to the strikes in question on September 2nd, Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated.
Okay, so first of all, it's now the White House position that Hegseth didn't give the order, except for the president 100% believes Hegseth when he says he didn't give the order, but it's also the fact that now the President of the United States, through his press secretary, is now blaming this admiral for the strikes. It's very unclear what their official position is. Second, Leavitt is reading a very clearly scripted legal statement of how serious this is, and it should give you an idea of how serious the DOJ and the White House counsel's office are taking it because she's reading that, and it's not something you'd hear if they weren't worried about the legality of all this. And then just after that, Leavitt was asked why the White House can't confirm whether even 2 survivors were killed, if they were even there. Leavitt didn't have an answer and still pinned it on the admiral.
Why won't the administration either confirm or deny or reveal whether or not there were survivors after that initial first strike? And what imminent threat would 2 survivors pose who were clinging presumably to the wreckage of that boat?
Again, as I said, I think you guys are sort of not listening fully to the statement I've provided. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was totally destroyed and the threat to the narco-terrorists, to the United States, was eliminated. And for any further questions about his thinking, I would defer you to the Department of War. I obviously wasn't in the room.
That's not an answer. It also wasn't a question directed at the Department of Defense, which I know she calls the Department of War here, but legally the name is still Defense. She was asked directly why the White House wasn't doing something and refused to answer. So it looked like after yesterday, the White House at least had its story. But again, today, it changed. This time, Hegseth, during a cabinet meeting, said actually he didn't see anyone in the water and wasn't even in the room for the strike.
As you can imagine, at the Department of War, we got a lot of things to do. So I didn't stick around for the hour and 2 hours, whatever, where all the sensitive site exploitation digitally occurs. So I moved on to my next meeting. A couple of hours later, I learned that commander had made which he had the complete authority to do. And by the way, Admiral Bradley made the correct decision to ultimately sink the boat and eliminate the threat. He sunk the boat, and eliminated the threat. And it was the right call. We have his back, and the American people are safer because narco-terrorists know you can't bring drugs through the water and eventually on land if necessary. It has to do to the American people. We will eliminate that threat, and we're proud to do it.
So you didn't see any survivors, to be clear, after the first strike?
I did not personally see survivors, but I stand, because the thing was on fire. It was exploded and fire or smoke. You can't see anything. You got digital. This is called the fog of war. This is what you in the press don't understand. You sit in the air-conditioned offices.
Okay, so first of all, the fog of war isn't a literal fog. It refers to the chaos and uncertainty that is war. Second, while it sounds like Hegseth has the admiral's back here, what he said undermines the follow-on strike by saying he didn't see anybody in the water, which raises questions about why a follow-on strike would have been needed in the first place, but he also says actually he wasn't even there for it, despite more than a half dozen military sources saying he was, and then saying the admiral had full authority. That's not taking responsibility on Hegseth's part, it's running from it and pinning it on somebody else. Also, for what it's worth here, it really looked like Trump was having a hard time staying awake in this cabinet meeting today, and I mean, Hegseth had to speak loudly right in Trump's ear to stop him from falling over, so I don't know what's going on there. I'll probably do something about it on social media. Anyway, no sooner had Hegseth said that than his own Pentagon seemed to reverse its stance.
Can you talk about the autonomy that's given to the commanders who are carrying out these operations, like Admiral Bradley, to make decisions? Like in this case, I'm assuming the first strike took out the boat and any actions that followed. Can you talk about the autonomy they're given?
Absolutely. So the Secretary has been very clear in every statement that we've released about these strikes that they are presidentially directed. And the chain of command functions as it should. And we make sure that commanders on the ground their positions are taken into account, and they are able to tell us and make decisions if they see things that need to be flagged. But at the end of the day, the Secretary and the President are the ones directing these strikes. And any follow-on strikes like those which were directed by Admiral Bradley, the Secretary 100% agrees with.
Okay, that is the Pentagon spokesperson Kingsley Wilson trying to blame the admiral, but instead saying that not only do the orders for these strikes and the double tap come from Hegseth, they came directly from the president. Meaning if these strikes are found to be war crimes under international law or murder under U.S. law, that 26-year-old deputy press secretary just said Donald Trump was responsible during an official Department of Defense briefing. Now, I don't know what will happen next, but it doesn't look good right now for Wilson, but really for Pete Hegseth at the very least. For months, going back to last spring when he sent classified attack plans in an unclassified group chat, his history advocating for war crimes and the people who commit them, something I'm planning to write about on the Substack very soon here. There are also questions about how vulnerable he is to being exploited by foreign actors, given his history with alcohol abuse and domestic abuse, again, all alleged, and the fact that he's not well-liked among military officials. It's really possible here that Pete Hegseth's days are numbered, and whatever happens with these strikes is the end of it for him. All right. That's it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show, whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications if you're a watcher on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got a subscription drive happening right now for paid members. You can subscribe for just $5 a month, the price of a cup of coffee, you guys. Also, 20% off on annual subscriptions or a locked-in price to become a founder member, what I call the Making the Most Sense member for the Substack. You get access to all sorts of original weekly reporting, the community chat for Make It Make Sense, people who just want to have a real conversation about what's happening in the world, and the brand new newsletter, things you forgot from civics class, that it's all for paid subscribers. If you don't want to do that, it's the holidays. I totally get it, but it does help support independent journalism and lets me do this as my full-time job. But as always, share the show on social media. It's MIMS News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.